Did you know that only 25% of Americans can name all three branches of government? It's a staggering statistic that highlights a big gap in political knowledge. And it's not just a US issue. Around the world, many people lack a solid grasp of how politics really works. Here's a shocker. Studies show that informed voters are 30% more likely to make choices that lead to better local policies and improvements in their communities. Gidron Hall 2017. Yet despite its importance, political science often seems like a dry subject reserved for academics. But what if I told you that understanding political science could drastically change how you experience politics every day? In this video, we'll dive into why every voter should grasp the basics of political science. We'll explore how this knowledge can help you see through political strategies, understand the real impact of policies, and learn from global and historical lessons. Stay tuned as we uncover why knowing the ins and outs of political science isn't just for the experts, it's essential for every voter. Chapter 1. The Power Play: How Political Science Decodes Political Games. Politics is often described as a game, but it's not always clear who's winning or losing. Political science helps us understand these moves and countermoves. It's like having the playbook for the biggest game in town. For instance, think about how politicians frame their messages. Ever notice how a candidate will talk about freedom or security during a campaign? That's not by accident. Political scientists call this issue framing, and it's a powerful tool to shape public opinion. Consider this. Research shows that voters are 20% more likely to support a candidate who frames issues in terms of freedom rather than regulation. Druckmann, 2001. That's huge. Understanding these strategies allows voters to see beyond the buzzwords. Another common tactic is agenda setting. Politicians and the media often decide what issues get the spotlight. If something is in the news every day, it suddenly feels like the most important thing in the world. But is it really? Take, for example, the media focus on crime. Studies have shown that even when crime rates are falling, increased media coverage can make the public believe crime is on the rise. McCombs and Shaw, 1972. Political science teaches us to question these narratives. It's not about being cynical, it's about being informed. By understanding the strategies behind these political moves, voters can cut through the noise and make decisions based on facts, not spin. Chapter 2. Behind the Curtain: Unmasking Political Narratives. Every politician has a story to tell. But these aren't just any stories. They are carefully crafted narratives designed to influence how we think and feel. Political science gives us the tools to unmask these narratives and see what's really going on. Take, for example, the concept of political myth. This isn't about fairy tales. It's about powerful stories that shape our understanding of the world. One famous example is the American dream. Politicians often evoke this idea to suggest that anyone can succeed if they work hard enough. But is that always true? Studies have shown that economic mobility in the US is lower than in many other developed countries. Chetty et al., 2014. By understanding this, voters can see when a politician is selling a dream rather than a reality. Another tool politicians use is symbolic politics. This is when leaders use symbols, like the flag or a national monument, to invoke emotional responses. These symbols are powerful because they tap into our identities and values. But here's the thing: emotions can cloud judgment. For instance, research shows that voters are more likely to support policies when they are framed in symbolic terms, even if they don't fully understand the policy details. Sears, 1983. Political science helps us recognize when we're being swayed by symbols rather than substance. It teaches us to ask, what's the real issue here? By seeing through these narratives, voters can focus on what really matters, policies that affect their lives. Chapter 3. The Voting Equation: How Policies Affect Your Everyday Life. It's easy to think of politics as something distant, something that doesn't really affect us day to day. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Every policy decision made by our leaders has a ripple effect on our lives. Take, for example, tax policies. They might sound boring, but they directly impact how much money you take home each month. Did you know that in 2021, the average American household paid about $16,000 in federal taxes? Tax Foundation 2021. That's a significant chunk of change. Or consider healthcare policy. In the US, healthcare is a hot-button issue because it's so closely tied to your wallet. A study found that medical expenses are the leading cause of bankruptcy in America. American Journal of Public Health, 2019. So when politicians talk about changing healthcare, they're not just talking about abstract ideas, they're talking about something that could make or break your financial future. Then there's education policy. The quality of education in your community affects property values, crime rates, and even your job prospects. For example, areas with better schools tend to have higher property values, NBER 2016. This means that education policy doesn't just impact students, it impacts everyone who owns a home in that district. Political science helps us see these connections. It turns abstract policy debates into real-world issues that affect our wallets, our health, and our communities. By understanding the real impact of policies, voters can make decisions that protect their interests and improve their lives. If you want more great videos, hit subscribe and let's keep going. Chapter 4. Global Insights. What international politics can teach us locally. Politics isn't just local, it's global. And what happens on the world stage can teach us a lot about what's happening in our own backyard. For instance, look at how international trade agreements affect local economies. You might not think much about a trade deal with another country, but it can have a direct impact on your job, the price of goods, and even the air you breathe. Consider NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's been credited with creating jobs in some sectors while causing job losses in others, USITC 2020. But what's less talked about is how it also influenced environmental policies. Because of increased trade, there was a push for stronger environmental regulations to manage cross-border pollution. This is a perfect example of how global politics shape local realities. Another way international politics impact us is through migration. When there's political instability in one part of the world, it can lead to waves of migration that change the demographics of a neighborhood or city. For example, the Syrian refugee crisis led to significant changes in immigration policies across Europe and the US, UNHCR 2016. Understanding the reasons behind these migrations helps us see that these are not just isolated events, but part of larger global trends. Political science also shows us that international relations can offer lessons on governance. Take, for example, the success of social democracies in Scandinavia. Countries like Sweden and Norway consistently rank high in happiness and quality of life indexes, World Happiness Report 2021. Their political systems prioritize social welfare, and they manage to do it without stifling economic growth. These examples can inspire local leaders to adopt best practices from around the world. By learning from global politics, we can better understand the forces shaping our own lives. It teaches us that the world is interconnected and that what happens across the globe can have direct consequences at home. Chapter 5. The History Factor. Learning from past political mistakes. History has a way of repeating itself, especially in politics. That's why it's so important for voters to understand historical context. Political science isn't just about the present, it's about seeing the patterns that have played out over time. One of the biggest lessons history teaches us is the danger of ignoring warning signs. Take the rise of authoritarian regimes in the 20th century. Countries like Germany, Italy, and Spain saw the erosion of democratic norms long before dictators took full control. Arendt, 1951. These regimes often started with seemingly small changes, curbing the press, restricting free speech, and undermining the judiciary. It's a reminder that democratic erosion doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process, and political science helps us recognize it before it's too late. Another important lesson from history is the role of economic inequality and political instability. The French Revolution, for example, was driven by extreme economic disparity between the rich and the poor. Similarly, economic grievances fueled the Arab Spring protests in 2011, World Bank 2015. Understanding these historical events reminds us that when inequality grows too wide, it can lead to social upheaval. Political science also helps us understand the consequences of foreign interventions. For instance, the Vietnam War and the invasion of Iraq both started with the intention of spreading democracy. However, both conflicts ended up being long, costly and controversial, with questionable outcomes. Kennedy, 1987. These examples show that good intentions in foreign policy don't always lead to good results. By studying history, voters can better understand the long-term impacts of political decisions. It's about learning from the past to avoid making the same mistakes in the future. Chapter 6. The Citizen's Toolkit. Empowering voters with political science. Informed voting isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. But how do you make sure you're making the best choices? That's where political science comes in. It provides a toolkit for citizens to navigate the complex world of politics with confidence. One of the most important tools is critical thinking. Political science encourages voters to ask questions like, who benefits from this policy? What are the potential consequences? By asking the right questions, voters can see beyond the surface. Another key tool is understanding different voting systems. Not all democracies are the same. For example, the US uses a first-past-the-post system where the candidate with the most votes wins. But other countries, like Germany, use proportional representation, which can lead to more balanced government representation. Norris, 2004. Understanding these differences can help voters appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of their own system. Political science also teaches us about the importance of civic participation beyond voting. Protests, petitions, and public comments on legislation are all ways to influence politics. Research shows that when citizens engage in these activities, they can sway policy decisions. Verber, Schlossman, and Brady, 1995. It's a reminder that democracy is more than just showing up on election day. It's about staying engaged year-round. Finally, political science gives us the ability to spot misinformation. In the age of social media, false information spreads fast. A study found that false news stories are 70% more likely to be retweeted than true stories. Vosugi, Roy, and Aral, 2018. Understanding the tactics used to spread misinformation can help voters make better informed decisions. By equipping themselves with these tools, voters can become more empowered and engaged citizens. It's about making sure your voice is heard and your vote truly counts. Hit subscribe to support our channel and be the first to see new videos.